We have quite a few waiting. Or am I on mute? I'm not on mute.
Hello, you guys.
Hello. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Okay.
Oh, and then Mark, you remember we're gonna just disable the chat room.
Already done.
Thank you.
I figured out how to do it on YouTube as well.
Oh, thank you. So you don't have to deal with that again.
It temporarily broke the stream though when I turned it off on YouTube.
How are you?
Oh, really?
Okay. Oh, and then Mark, remember we're gonna just disable the chat room.
Already done.
Thank you.
There's
Feedback.
a delay.
Okay. I'm just replying to Deb Hopper. She's
So
making sure she has the right invite.
are we live right now?
They're in the waiting room.
Are we live on the stream right now, Mark?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh,
All that's being displayed is the agenda.
they can't hear us though.
I don't believe so. I'll have to turn off my headset to
to
figure that out. There's a pretty good delay
here.
Are you letting people in, Rita? You letting people in, Rita?
Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Larry.
Here we are again.
Ms. Bertel.
Hello.
Hi, this is Veronica. Hello, this is
Hello.
Latrice.
How you doing?
Hi, Veronica. Hi, honey. We got to go on a private chat. How are you?
Pretty good.
Good. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
All right.
But even when you look at our
Hello.
Hello, Miss Youngblood.
Oh, okay, good. Where? I don't see me.
Yeah, I had the same problem.
Somebody sees me?
Yeah, we can see
I
you.
can see you.
All right, just want to make sure I get my vote in.
Yeah,
So we only see one person at a time?
I think so.
Change it to grid view.
Yeah, your view has to be changed to a full screen.
What happened?
Right-hand corner.
Mark's view.
Say
Okay,
what?
we're gonna change this to a full screen.
Yeah,
Okay.
and then there's a different, and if you have your video on, it can
I
show,
don't know.
I can
I'm
see all the
about to get
boxes of you guys right now. Hey, there's Jennifer Miller, I see ya.
Hello.
I'm surprised I got this far.
You're doing good.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good.
And so, yes, we are looking at social stories for kids about wearing masks and why people wear masks so that they're not frightened when they see everyone with masks.
I think people need to mute themselves so that we don't have all the background noise. Thank you. You can see the mute is in the left-hand corner, bottom left.
I got a question.
Yeah, Kenny.
I tried pulling the agenda up on my computer and it says I don't have access. So I could read through everything and follow along.
Did you go into, do you use board docs with your school district also?
Yes, I do.
So I had that problem one time before because I was logged into board docs under like my Lindbergh account. It wouldn't let me view the SSD stuff. But if you go to SSD's website and then like click the links through there, it should work.
I'll try it. Thanks.
Or you might have to log out of board docs to also in addition to that.
Well, I logged out and I tried, I was morning, so I read through everything, but I want to be able to follow along and now it won't let me on. It's kind of weird. So I'll try the SSD.
Oh, what'd I do? Okay.
Is Deb Hopper on?
I have not seen her yet.
Okay.
Will be a device audio. Start video.
So this is Veronica. I see 4 of you all. I see Elizabeth, Rita, Mark, and myself.
And I'm here. This is Debbie Hopper.
Oh, okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Debbie, and Stacy's here too.
Okay.
I'm 254084, I think.
Okay.
I don't know how to make my name pop up there.
I think you're fine. It's usually when you go in and you're registered, then that's when you put your name in.
Oh, I didn't register. I just clicked on the link.
Yeah, that's fine.
What was your name again? I can rename you.
You can sign
Debbie
it up.
Hopper.
You can sign me in there.
Yeah, it's easy.
I'm on my phone. My daughter's going to try to sign me onto her computer.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. I got the sheet to do the roll call. And Rita, I do have the sheet to do the roll call.
All right.
I'll just ask everybody to tell me their name, you know.
Okay. People are still joining.
Yep.
Now I can only see Rita and Mark. I don't see anybody else. Is there?
There are more
Oh,
people
here-
on
Okay,
when they have it set to screen share, and so you don't see the big group of people when they're screen sharing.
I see. Okay.
There should be an arrow kind of next to the pictures of the people, and it'll show you the rest of the people in the meeting.
Yeah. Oh, there everybody is. Okay.
So where on the website would you get on the meeting?
Up at the top, there's a leadership tab, and if you click that, you should then be able to click governing council, and then on the right side of that web page.
Okay, and the microphone.
Let me see it. Let me see it.
So there's a lot of feedback, so people will have to mute. And if you have two devices, an iPad and a phone, you're gonna have to mute both of them.
We turned them off.
Okay.
Thank you.
Where's the mute on here?
Are we ready to start?
I think so.
I can't get signed on, so I might be stuck without it. I don't know. They keep wanting to log me in at board docs.
It looks like though they're going to be screen sharing the agenda throughout the entire meeting, so I think we'll be able to follow along even if we can't pull it up ourselves.
Yeah, we'll have everything. Yeah, as we're going through it, everything, you'll be able to view it.
Okay.
All right, I'll do my best. I'm on my phone because my computer doesn't work so well with my Wi-Fi. So.
And I will say, Kenny, it's a little tougher on the phone to see everything, but you'll be able to see the pieces of it. You just won't get to see all the people. You'll see the screen.
Yeah, that's no problem.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, I'm showing 26 participants, so I think we can go ahead and get started.
Okay.
Good evening and welcome to our very first Zoom meeting, I think, for the Special School District Governing Council. Thank you for joining us.
The Pledge of Allegiance.
I heard your voice was very muffled. Are you asking me to call the roll?
And to the
Yeah, I can't hear it either.
well, we do this first and then roll. We're doing the Pledge of Allegiance and then the roll. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America.
Republic,
to the republic
for which it
one
stands,
one nation under God,
with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. So I'll go ahead and do the roll call. When I call your school district, would you please tell me your name? Afton.
Kenny Edgar.
Bayless.
Shannon Kohler.
Thank you. Brentwood.
Melissa Naird.
Clayton. Ferguson Florissant. Hancock
Walker.
Okay, thank you. Hancock Place.
Jennifer Kosman.
Thank you. Hazelwood. I know Dr. Lundberg was on here. Jennings.
John Schlereth.
Thank you. Kirkwood.
Jean Marie Andrews.
Thank you. Ladue.
Keisha Lee.
Thank you. Lindbergh.
Jennifer Miller.
Thank you. Hazelwood, Maplewood, Richmond Heights, I'm sorry. Melville.
Larry Felton.
Thank you. Normandy.
Karen Pierre.
Thank you. Parkway.
Debbie Hopper.
Thank you. Pattonville.
Excuse me, Ruth Petrov.
Thank you. Ridner.
Dr. Margaret Albin Wilson.
Thank you. Riverview Gardens. Myself. Is that Mary Oswald too? Okay. Rockwood. I'm sorry, I didn't hear the name. Rockwood, I didn't hear the name. Rockwood. Okay. University
I don't think
City.
Rockwood's present.
Okay, thank you. University City.
George Leonard for University City.
Thank you. Valley Park. And Webster Groves. Thank you.
We have a quorum.
Yes, we have a quorum.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next agenda item, may I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda as presented?
So moved, Rittner.
Is there anything to be pulled to action for discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed or abstentions? Motion carries. May I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes of the March 2nd, 2020 Governing Council meeting?
So moved, Afton.
Second, Ferguson Florissant.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Agenda item 4.01, any public comment?
We received one public comment from a Miss Jennifer Kostner. Sorry. I will pull it up and read it as she presented it.
Okay.
Dear Superintendent Keenan and the esteemed members of the Governing Council of SSD, I am making a public comment related to agenda item 5.01, the CSIP. My name is Jennifer Coker. I am a resident of Kirkwood. I am the parent of someone with a disability and the daughter of someone with a disability. I also have a disability and have been active in disability rights work since 1985. More recently, I have become active in racial equity efforts that are focused on promoting educational equity for Black children with a disability label. I appreciate SSD's ongoing work on its CSIP, particularly in the areas of equity and opportunity gaps. I would like to bring to the district's attention some research done by Dr. Karishma Furtado of Forward Through Ferguson and her colleagues, which show that the intersection of disabilities with race has significantly compounded the risk of out-of-school suspension in St. Louis region versus race alone. Such racial disparities in exclusionary discipline result in racial disparities in instructional time, which result in racial disparities in academic performance. In fact, research by Morris and Perry demonstrates that racial disparities is out-of-school suspension drives at least 1/5 of racial differences in academic performance. Fortunately, IDEA has mechanisms to minimize exclusionary discipline and maximize instructional time. According to a 2016 Dear Colleague letter, challenging behaviors that interfere with learning is supposed to be considered via the IEP process regardless of disability category. When necessary for FAPE, individualized behavior supports are supposed to be provided via the IEP in the form of special education and related services, supplementary aids and services to promote placement in the LRE, and supports for teacher and staff. And the general education teacher is supposed to contribute to the discussion about behavior in its entirety. In fact, maximizing instructional time is so important that even informal removals, such as for restorative practices, are supposed to be reported as disciplinary removals under certain circumstances. Unfortunately, I have seen breakdowns in how some partner districts manage challenging behaviors via the IEP, and data from the federal civil rights data collection indicates that these breakdowns affect Black students more than whites in some districts. I encourage a closer examination of SSD's practice regarding the use of the IEP in managing behavior as a strategy to minimize exclusionary discipline and maximize instructional time. In districts where these issues have been disproportionately affecting Black children, shoring up these practices should have a beneficial effect on the opportunity gap. Thank you for considering this perspective.
Deb, you're on mute.
Yeah, Debbie, you have to unmute.
Okay, our next superintendent report, agenda item 5. Agenda item 5.01, approval of the CSIP and 5-year rolling plan. Presentation by Paul Bauer, the deputy superintendent. Will we have a presentation?
Yes.
Yes. Yep, Paul Bauer, he's pulling it up, but yes, he will be presenting our CSIP plan.
Is the PowerPoint coming up?
Is it coming up, Mark?
I can see it behind there.
Well, no.
For a second.
There's somewhere. There it is. Okay.
There it is.
Okay. Good evening, members of the Governing Council. My name is Paul Bauer, the Deputy Superintendent of Special School District, and I'd like to take you through an update of this year's CSIP and talk about proposed revisions for the CSIP for next year. Next slide. I want to start with SSD's vision statement. This is a good place to start when we talk about strategic planning or improvement planning. Partners for each student's success. Typically, when we talk about partners, we talk about partner districts, but we have to remember that families are partners, business, industry, the community, and other agencies can be partners with us also. Next slide. Starting off with the current CSIP, we had 4 goals that were approved by our board and by the Governing Council. 26 strategies, you can see them laid out there. Next slide. 26 strategies is a lot, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but we have done, the strategy teams have done a pretty good job this year in working through them. I want to give an update of how action steps were completed, and we talk about numbers a lot, but we don't always talk about some of the accomplishments of the teams working on this. So I want to talk about that also. So goal 1 was the goal to improve student performance. You can see there 43 of 63 action steps were completed. And I'll note again, 63 is a high number of action steps for a CSIP goal or any sort of strategic plan goal. Next slide. But I want to talk about some of the key accomplishments. This strategy was directed at supporting our teachers so that they can support our students and help our students to be successful. And in that regard, we've done a lot of work on literacy and numeracy. We've completed resource guides. We've completed intervention guides. that will be available to all of our staff starting next year. We also have put processes in place for Tier 1 universal supports. Tier 1 universal supports are those sorts of things that you would see in any classrooms, things like lunchroom routines, routines for going home, for arriving, that sort of thing. And finally, they've done a lot to talk about supports to families for communication skills of their children. Next slide. One of the key areas of the CSIP is post-secondary outcomes, what our students do after they leave school. And we have done some good work in that. The strategies have worked on planning for self-determination and program called Charting the Life course, which is important, whereby students plan out their own goals for when they graduate and talk about how to achieve them. And those are both being piloted in districts throughout the county. Family engagement is a priority for us. We really have a goal to have families be equal partners in the education of their children. We have had family engagement activities going on in our district schools for several years, and we are starting to pilot them in partner districts also. And finally, as I talked about at the very beginning, partnerships. We've done some work in developing partnerships, tracking them, getting the word out to partnerships throughout the community. Next slide. The second goal had to do with workforce excellence. Again, 32 action steps, 9 of those were completed. When we had the change in administration in our human resources department, found that there were many things that were kind of the predecessor or the requirements to get to the action steps were not consistently in place. So they spent a lot of time working on those, which meant that they didn't get to spend a lot of time on the action steps. But still, they even with that, they completed more than a quarter of them this year. Next slide. Some of their key accomplishments were to implement a strategic advertising plan and to identify some recruiting avenues for various employee groups in the district, developing plans to increase retention rates. Retention is a problem in our district, especially among paraprofessionals. So we would really like to put some things into place to improve those rates of retention. And implemented building access security systems at central office and the learning center. That's a point of pride for special school district. We are ahead of many of the districts in St. Louis County in hardening our perimeters. Our buildings all have secure entrances. Our tech schools do not, but they're getting them. They're in the process of getting them. There is no way you can get into one of our special education schools without first walking through the office. And even to get to the office, you need to be buzzed in. So we have high security in all of our buildings. Same thing with central office and the learning center. We have a prox card system so that to limit access to those buildings. Next slide. And the teacher administrative evaluation systems are ready for deployment next year. Next slide, please. Our third goal had to do with engagement. And you can see they completed over half of the action steps for that goal. Next slide, I'm gonna go into some detail. The strategy teams for that goal did a lot of foundational work. We all know voice of customer is very important in improving our programs. And having engagement with the community is very important, but you need to have some foundational work that is done so that you can do that in a way to get accurate information you can use. So the strategy teams have done a lot of work in identifying stakeholder groups, in creating maps, process maps for customer data, processes to analyze and use the data, and also identifying other ways to get information from our customers and our stakeholders. And then in addition to the voice of customer work, they completed research for brand engagement, for brand identity for special school district, and develop some materials that can be used for that. Next slide. The last goal on this CSIP has to do with equity. You can see there's a lot of action steps. That was the other big goal as far as action steps go, and we completed 19 of those. So let's go on to the next slide. We'll talk about it some more. Some of the things they accomplish, relationships are so important. And we found that those schools in St. Louis County in which special education programs are very good and the students are being successful are the schools in which the principal and the area coordinator have a positive working relationship. So we did some research on that and came up with a way to assess that and to generate improvement plans for schools. We also had a team develop a Grow Your Own program. Due to some issues with the university that we were working with and with eligibility for our staff to participate, we had to put that on the back burner, and that program, if we choose to go in that direction in the future, will need some significant redesign. Next slide. We reviewed our teacher and coordinator caseloads to make sure that they were consistent across the county. And we have technical assistance teams throughout the county who provide teachers support in the case of crises or students with high need. And all of those teams receive training in cultural proficiency in order that they could develop their coaching and their support skills. Next slide. So now I want to talk about our proposed revisions. When we talk about our CSIP and we talk about what we do for students, we have to use a lens of equity. We have to look at everything we do through that lens of equity and ask some questions. And these are some of the questions. Are there underserved groups? Do we make decisions that ignore or worsen existing disparities among groups? What is the impact that our public comment had to do with the opportunity gap? What is the impact of what we decide and what we do on eliminating that opportunity gap or that achievement gap? And how will you meet the individual and cultural needs of each learner in the community? Next slide. In St. Louis, it seems like in St. Louis especially, but if you look at what's been in the news for the last week or so, our first thoughts are to think of equity as a black-white issue. And that is a huge area that we need to address equity. And I certainly don't want to imply that that's not an important factor. There are many other areas in which we need to address equity. Economic areas, religion areas, gender areas, sexual identity areas, so many different areas in which there are subgroups, and those subgroups are disparate from the main group, and we need to ensure that those subgroups have equity in their opportunity and have equity in their achievement. The model we are proposing does just that. We start with all of the information sources that we have. Instructional audit, evaluations, student performance, all those areas. And we examine those with that lens of equity. Are there some groups that are not performing well? Are there some groups that need more support, need more attention? After we do that, we create our CSIP, because the CSIP addresses the areas in which the district needs to improve. But the work doesn't stop there. A lot of things come out of that CSIP. We have curriculum plans, we have facilities plans, we have financial plans, all these plans that we have to have in place for the district to operate. Each of those plans also gets reviewed with that lens of equity. Do the plans meet the needs of each of the disparate groups in St. Louis County? Do the plans help ensure that every child in St. Louis County can succeed? When we put that all together, that gives us student success. Next slide, please. When we made some changes in the CSIP, some revisions, we looked at a few things. We looked at the number of strategies we had. 26 strategies is a lot. One way to look at it, if you have 26 strategies, then you are dividing the efforts of people 26 ways. Whereas if you go with 10 or 12 strategies, you've got those same people, but you're dividing their effort only 10 or 12 ways. So it's a good way, having fewer strategies is a good way to allow that focus, to allow that emphasis, and to really dedicate their efforts. Where we could, we combined strategies, and also we looked at the progress on strategies. Next slide, please. So our revisions combined strategies where collaboration was already occurring. A good example of that is in Goal 1. We had a strategy team for literacy, a strategy team for numeracy, and a strategy team for behavior. Each of those strategies had gotten all the interventions, all that ready, the content, the expertise, the science, all there. The stress now, we need to stress implementation. So those strategies were combined so that the focus is on implementing what we have rather than developing it because it's already been developed. We also had another example. It has to do with the post-secondary outcomes. The strategy team for student self-determination and the strategy team for our Charting Life course for post-secondary planning were already working together. So why not make them one strategy team? We eliminated the strategies that were largely completed, and we eliminated the strategies that are required business practice. We had some strategies, especially in the workforce area, that were general business operations. You shouldn't have to improve general business operations because you should already be performing them. So those will be addressed. They will be continued in their implementation, but they're not part of the CSIP plan. As I mentioned before, fewer strategies enables greater focus, and the focus is on processes and on implementation. Next slide, please. So this is what it looks like. The goals were previously approved by our board and by the governing council, but we have 4 strategies for Goal 1. One has to do with the multi-tiered systems of support. Second is for post-secondary plans. The third is that we moved the strategy for security from the workforce excellence to student performance. Because if students are going to learn and teachers are going to teach, they need to feel safe and secure in their schools every day. So we put that strategy in that goal. And finally, to continue to work with our families with the goal, the focus that our families become equal partners in the education of their children. Goal 2. Our next page, please. Goal 2, focus is very simple: to improve how we retain, how we recruit, how we hire, and how we keep our staff. And the second strategy has to do with diversity. We want to have a diverse workforce that matches the demographics of the St. Louis region and of the state and of the Midwest. Next slide. Goal 3 for engagement. First, we want to improve and sustain and develop new collaborative relationships with industries and businesses and agencies across the county to help our students have more opportunities. And this was a strategy that was included under student performance, but was not as comprehensive. And second, we talked about the foundational work for voice of customer. Now we're going to work on processes for doing it. Next slide. And finally, the biggest change is in goal 4 with equity. Instead of having a bunch of specific steps to take that didn't really, in themselves, being completed, didn't have an impact, we are looking at putting processes in place to use that lens of equity that I talked about to ensure that we are focused on achieving equity in student outcomes through everything we do, not just through our teaching, through our business operations, through how we allocate resources. Next slide. Now, moving forward, we are looking at developing a strategic plan next year for the district, starting this summer and going through. Target is to be completed in the winter, with input from all of our stakeholders, from all of our customers. Next slide, please. We want to target student performance. We want to emphasize equity. We want to emphasize equity in opportunity as well as outcomes. And the focus will be on all district departments and resources to help us achieve that equity. Next slide. So the proposed timeline for that is that I'd already said summer, fall, and winter to develop it. In the spring, bring it to our Board of Education for approval, and then bring it to the governing council next June requesting approval. Next slide. And with that, are there any questions?
I have a couple of questions, if I may. I participated in the last couple of PRCs. Have the recommendations of the PRC been included in the considerations of the CSIP revision?
They were as I think of the recommendations, they had a lot to do with parent involvement, parent engagement, and there was also a focus on career technical education. Career technical next year, all of our schools will be brought together into one group, and we'll be focusing on that. And we have done the reorganization that will enable us to focus on improving, expanding those career tech fields and focusing on equity in those fields. As far as the parent force or the parent voice, we have been and will continue to address that with our parent engagement efforts. You're muted.
I was going to do my Marcel. I think the other thing I wanted to ask about, when you talk about going out and talk to your customers, I'm going to presume that governing council will get a chance to contribute as much as we can with our backgrounds. The other thing I wanted to ask about with what you're looking at the CSIP, does that have an implication of changes for the partnership agreement that might more reflect some of the equity considerations and some of the other consolidations of your scopes?
We've already started talking with each partner district, planning together for integrated models for interventions. I think the next step is to look at working with each partner district and expanding that collaboration into other areas. Again, we need to focus on equity in all of these, but I referred to several times about the opportunity gap, and I think that is a key place in which that we can talk with the partner districts about to ensure that all of our students, that there is no opportunity gap.
The final comment that when you talk with the individual districts, I would recommend that you make sure school board members are invited, because the information of what's going on here may not always flow to the board.
And Larry, I would like to say though, as we're working with each individual district, going into this next year, the request is to make sure that there is presentations that are brought back to the boards in the partner districts to update the boards on special education, and they would update on these pieces. And then going back to your one of your first questions, Larry, absolutely, we will be seeking, input and feedback from the governing council too. So you guys your voice will be a part of that strategic planning.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a couple. This is Sheila Powell Walker from Ferguson Force. And so the first thing I wanted to do was to just I wanted to clarify something. You were sharing some information on the existing CSIP. And so one of the things that came up was the Tier 1 universal supports. Is that right? That's the existing plan, and that's going to be in effect until June of next year, right? Or, right? That's the one that's currently happening?
Well, we had strategies in the existing plan for universal supports, and it will be continued next year. The focus this year, 1920, has been in developing a way to roll out those supports so that the Tier 1 supports are being used consistently across St. Louis County, give our administrators and our supports and our other instructional support some key things to be looking at. That's not going away. As a matter of fact, it's being emphasized. In the coming year, we're going to be focusing on implementation to make sure it's there and to support teachers in implementing those things.
Okay, so I think what I wanted to inquire about was, you mentioned earlier, sort of to give us an example, you mentioned routines such as, a plan for, how students will board the bus and the cafeteria. But I also wondered, is behavioral support a part of that? And I also am wondering, we know that when we talk about the Tier 1 plan, we're looking at a plan that supports the needs of 80 to 90% of the students. And I know those needs would likely vary greatly across all of the partner districts. So I just wondered where things are with making sure that that is equitable, if that makes sense. So if a school has very low discipline, we know their Tier 1 plan may look one way, but a school with higher discipline, it's going to look different. So I'm just curious to know kind of where things are with that.
Well, I think you're absolutely correct. And the reason we're focusing on implementation in the coming year is that we want every school to be implementing at the level of those schools that don't have all the behavior issues because they have good Tier 1 plans.
Sure.
And okay. Sheila, this is Liz Keenan. We mapped out for the first time for every district, Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3, and we did a gap analysis. And this was done between our SSD staff and the liaisons and the curriculum directors and the staff from each one of the partner districts. So we have mapped that out for reading, for math, and SEL. And so now it's drilling it down into what does that look like in terms of each one of the schools. And as tier 1 is really up to the partner district.
Sure.
We really can't dictate that. What we do say is, what can we provide for Tier 2 or to enhance Tier 1 in a research-based methodology? And we have a list of all those research-based methodologies that we will support and provide professional development, to provide coaching. But that's really where we're trying to backfill and help work with the partner district to understand where are their gaps? Where do they need to start to fill in a little bit more for Tier 2 and Tier 3 for SEL or for math? And I will be clear, I think it's really interesting because a lot of the partner districts are doing a lot of the same reading literacy for Tier 1, but for math, that's where we're starting to see where the gaps are in terms of where we can start to enhance and support tier 2 and tier 3. And then SEL, that is also mapping out those pieces and deciding what is the district doing. Are they using restorative practices? Are they working on different research-based methodologies to support SEL supports in their schools? So that's where we felt it was very intentional when we met with the superintendents one-on-one for each one of the districts in January and February to discuss so that we can work hand in hand together, because we can't just go in and say, we're going to just do a one size fits all. We're going to look at what each district is doing, and we're going to support it with and fit what would work with each one of the districts to support the professional development for the staff.
Okay, and then I have a question too, actually, regarding the plan that we just heard about tonight, the one, I guess, that will go into effect in June of 2021. One of the things that I'm wondering about is how often do you plan to review data or to have some sort of checkpoints to assess the progress of that particular plan? And do you anticipate that will you do adjustments midstream, or will you plan to put those things into effect the following year? And I know that was probably two questions there, so I'll let you respond to that one, and then I have one final question.
I think it's very important that the CSIP is our guiding model, and you don't just use your guiding model and hope that you get to where you need to by the end of the year. So it's important to have key indications of when we're going to be looking to see where progress is being made. And so quarterly will be reported out, but monthly we will be looking at what the progress is being made in each one of our areas to indicate what data points that we are looking at and to see where the growth is being made. Now, sometimes you can't always see growth overnight in terms of student outcomes. That might be a delayed effect, but for us to make sure that we're putting in some key indicators and we're tracking that data. And, you know, if you don't measure it, if you don't look at it it's not going to be valued. And for me, it's very important that with our administration and with that, everybody understands what we're trying to achieve. So it's going to be quarterly report out, but it's going to be monthly check-ins on the progress.
As a matter of fact, I already have a meeting scheduled for Wednesday morning with the gold champions for the CSIP, and two of the things we're going to talk about are measures and reporting schedules.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And then the final question just has to do with, you mentioned engagement as one of the things that will be focused on in this coming plan. And so we know that measuring engagement, it can be like, that's kind of elusive, you know, trying to figure out how to capture that. So I just wondered, you know, as you think about engagement and being able to figure out whether or not you've met your goals, what things have you thought about that you will measure or look at that will help you to know whether or not you're actually hitting the mark in terms of engagement?
I agree with you on that too.
I'm sorry, Elizabeth.
I was going to say, I agree with you on that too, because engagement is a very broad word, just like we were talking about equity, and it means different things to different people. And one of the things that we've talked about is being able to bring in a consultant around how do we kind of target who we are and what the engagement looks like for each one of the areas that's relevant, and to really target that piece of it. And then I'll let Dr. Bauer add in the other pieces that we were going to include into it.
Well, and as far as parent engagement, we have some, you know, we are not doing things like measuring how many parents come to, you know, bake sales. We are measuring how many parents are reporting that they work with their children at home, how many parents talk with their teachers regularly about what their child is working on, what the reports from the parents are about the communication and the partnership that we have with each of our schools. So it's you know, one of the first books that we all looked at for this is a book entitled Beyond the Bake Sale. That used to be, we'd say, you know, we have parent engagement because we have bake sales and donuts for dads and things like that. But we've moved way beyond that. So the measures we're using are just that. How effective is it in meeting the needs of our families to become partners with us.
Okay, thank you.
I had a few questions as well. With regards to, I also was part of that public review committee, so I'm kind of upset that I don't see as many. I mean, all of our recommendations were not regarding parent involvement. There were a lot of recommendations outside of that and CTE that we spent a lot of time in reviewing the district and its inner workings to make the recommendations. To see them just sit on a shelf and not be implemented is a little disheartening. And then also when you talked about equity, you talked about there were 42 action steps and you completed less than half of those. Yeah. And so now you're dismissing those. What were the ones that weren't met?
The ones that were not met, I will have to get back to you on that. I have all that information, but I don't have it at my fingertips.
And I just want to be clear that the public review process, those are some of the things that we're implementing in our CTE, and it's like moving forward. So it's not being put on a shelf. And,
well, it's not just CTE. So it's
well,
a lot.
I know. I'm just talking about what you meant about that. Some of those pieces of it are that we built into our day-to-day operations. And these are pieces that Dr. Bauer talked about these are some standard of operations that we should be expecting. So the CSIP is more like, well, how do we drill down into some of these other pieces that we want to fill in the gaps? And some of the things that were already in the public review have already been implemented and instituted into the process of our day-to-day and our process of how we do work as an organization. So
I'm familiar with what the CSIP process is. What I'm saying is we made a lot of recommendations on a lot of different factors with regards to the district. Paul is the one that brought up the CCE. So that's what I referenced.
Yeah,
and the parent engagement. There were also a lot of recommendations with regards to hiring and your Grow Your Own program, which you said you had to place on the back burner, because also equity and hiring in a lot of your districts was an issue. At the time we were going through the process, and even at the beginning of this year, to my understanding, you had several of your North County districts that were still had a lot of vacancies in SSD positions. So
actually, no, they weren't. We saw more vacancies in the middle and the south. So I want to make sure we're clear about that. But the other thing about that is with the Grow Your Own, there were issues that were internal with how to get people even wanting to do it. Because when they surveyed people, there wasn't enough people who were interested. Secondly, there was licensing issues with the organization. So we aren't saying we're not going to continue with the Grow Your Own, but the way the committee was looking at it, it wasn't viable because first of all, people weren't interested in it. And secondly, the universities weren't able to fulfill the requirement pieces of it. So the Grow Your Own pieces, we want to make sure that we're looking at the retention and how do we support the Grow Your Own's not going away. We just needed that committee really researched it and found it wasn't viable in the way they were going through it. And so that's some of the issues when you go out of CSIP is there are some ideas that people think that they have, and then they find out the root cause was the wrong thing. And that then they decided that we have to go and take a different direction. So the Grow Your Own in specific issue, there was multiple issues in terms of viability with the university or the colleges that wanted to participate. There was also people who were, when we were saying we were offering it, they weren't committing to it because they just didn't want to. And thirdly, people think that, that our paraprofessionals, that they want to go on to be teachers. And we have teachers who want to be paraprofessionals. So what we found out through the surveys was that people who are paraprofessionals want to be paraprofessionals. They don't want to go into being the teacher pieces of it. So it was looking at how do we support people who are coming in. We are showing that right now our hiring practices that we were employing this year and starting with hiring people earlier and being more competitive, that has been much more beneficial for us in terms of vacancies. Where we are looking at it is how do we make sure the retention of our teachers in the first 5 years, and also making sure that we're looking at retention for our paraprofessionals in the first 5 years.
So what was the universities or the schools that were involved in the growing room?
I can't go into specifics on that. We can give you a summary on that, which ones they reviewed and which ones we're wanting to partner with it. We can give you
No, the ones that you said that were unsuccessful and that people weren't interested in. What schools were you offering them? Is what I'm asking.
It was a university, but it was the group was recommending a university in Illinois. The problem with that is you can't have somebody in Illinois be licensed in Missouri. So when you look at that was an issue, we said then that we have to relook to find out if there's a university closer by. But that wasn't as viable as the one that they were consulting with. So I came in July 1st and we started talking about this in August, and it was concerning to me that they were talking with a university in Illinois when these people would be walking out with a license to teach in Illinois, not in Missouri.
Okay. The other question I had was about still on the equity. What are your identified disparity groups? You said it's bigger than race, which it is, but there's also race is a factor in this region. And we know that it is. So some of those other subgroups that you mentioned, when you add race to that, there's still the racial factor. So how are you identifying the disparate group?
And as I said, I certainly don't want to make it sound like I'm minimizing racial issues, because that is a huge factor that we all need to address. We have issues, disparities between our students receiving free and reduced lunch and not receiving free and reduced lunch. We also have, for example, in our tech schools, participation in some of the shops. We don't have gender equity in participation in some of the shops in our tech schools. Those are two that right off the top of my head, two areas.
Okay, and does resource allocation factor into that equity conversation?
Absolutely. But you have to remember that resources, while resources are important, we're not talking about equity and resources. We're talking about equity in outcomes. In other words, the important factor isn't how much money we spend. The important factor is how our students perform.
Right, and I'm not necessarily talking about money when I talk about resources. If you're not putting enough teachers into a school district that has higher needs, then that's a lack of resources.
Well, and you can include staff,
so you're not going to get those educational outcomes.
Yeah, and I think and I think the nice thing about Keisha, that when we're looking at resources, we're wanting to make sure that if you're a student in Hazelwood and you're a student in Rockwood, are we investing the same amount of internal supports for students for special ed? And that's our priority, to make sure that students with special needs are being supported equally across the county. And, that's where the equity pieces come into play when we look at more of our diversity in our diverse populations throughout the county. And I agree. It's like, I think that's the good thing about special school district. And from my own personal experience being in a single district, was that here in special school district, no matter what district the student participates, is going to school in, SSD can provide equal supports to manage the support of the IEPs in each one of the districts. Meaning we will support the related services, the special ed teachers, the paraprofessionals, all of those things, and we apply the same supports across the county.
Well, if I may, George Leonard from University City, if I may, I was taught when we started talking about equity that equity isn't equal. And
Correct.
You're talking about it as if it is equal. And
Correct.
I don't know if maybe where Keisha is coming from, But I think we as individual school districts and special school district with its overarching responsibility across the board through the county need to really be taking a hard look at when the possibility may be there, the likelihood is there that there are going to be students and districts that are going to really provide the quality we would like to see. They really need more resources.
That's right.
Because
and
there's
that's why
students who have greater
And
needs.
I say that not as something that I've read or heard. My son was started in first floor and we finished in Ladue. And he received special school district services from the 3rd grade through the 12th grade. And SSD looks very different in third floor than it does in Ladue. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about resource allocation and when I'm talking about equity. It's not the same special school district.
Well, and I would like to offer that when we sat down with each one of the superintendents, we reviewed what does it look like? And we're talking about what the student and the IEPs and what are required for the IEPs. So I think that there's two rules of thumb here that we have to look at. What are we providing for the special ed students? Now, there are some districts that supplement paraprofessionals. There are some districts that supplement other support systems that SSD does not do. But what we primarily focused in on is when we sat down with each one of the superintendents, we did look at what are the needs, what is your population, what are the special education students and the IEPs. We looked at minutes and we determined the factor that is it, how do we make sure that we're ensuring that the supports are going to the schools in a similar fashion so that we are recommending. Now, if you have a student that has more amounts of services, then we make sure we support that. And so that's why we have to look at it. But there are districts that support more paraprofessionals in the gen ed classrooms. There are districts that support more SEL services that are outside of special ed. So that's where there starts to get these pieces where things get a little different, but we try to make sure that we're looking at it across the board and we're individualizing it through the IEPs and what's required through those with related services, through speech services, through teachers and paras.
I would just make a suggestion, and it's the last thing I have to say, that maybe that needs to happen as a group instead of individual. So when you get what you get, you don't necessarily know what everybody else is getting and how it looks on the other side of the county. So if you're talking to me and we're talking minutes to minutes, and I'm looking on paper and saying, oh, well, yeah, they're getting the same minutes as my kids, and yeah, they got the same amount of paras, but it looks different. If we're not having that conversation to say, what does it actually look like in your district versus what does it look like in my district? You don't know that there's actually a difference. You're eating hot dogs and we're eating bratwurst. And nobody ever told you any different because it still came on a bun. That's all I'm saying. Is I think that we need to have these conversations outside of isolation so that people can actually understand what it looks like in totality.
I mean, I've heard that for years, not knowing a lot of detail about what those differences are or the perceived differences are. But, Keisha sounds like she has a useful experience in terms of comparing. And I think it's just worth pursuing with people that have that kind of comparison information to really try to get to the bottom of why, are there feelings that there are inequities? I mean, if you want to dedicate to equity, then you better find out why people feel that it isn't equitable. But I know that neither she nor I are the only people who have felt that way.
And that's been a common theme, though, George. And George, that's been a common theme I've heard since the day I came here. So that has been one thing that is very much a cultural discussion here across. And that is why we went individual. But we also, if you had a question about another district, we will show you how you compared. We compared all the superintendents were able to see how each one of them were all in alignment with the amount of services and supports based on their needs. And so, that's where it's important for me to make sure that we are continuing a continuity across the districts, but also maintaining the individuality pieces that are required for each one of the districts based on their needs. But it's also, I agree, I am not about, and we are not about that. We are looking at supporting one district differently with more supports versus another district. So we're applying the same pieces around what is the caseloads, and that is typically how they do it across the nation in terms of how do you determine services by minutes through caseload numbers, and you have to apply some sort of a ratio to be able to kind of say, are you above it or are you below it? And most of the counties, unless you're a smaller district, the smaller districts, like I said at the last governing council, when I gave you all the PowerPoints, but all the data that I gave to each one of the superintendents that we reviewed, and it showed how we broke it down for each district, but to be able to say what we are needing to recommend. And there is what factors that play into each district very differently. You can get one student who has a large amount of supports on an IEP that will skew somebody's ratio in one school. So there's multiple factors that we're trying to make sure we're looking at daily. But I just want you guys to realize that we're not just taking it and applying the same ratio across the board equally. I mean, we're looking at it so that we have a foundation to see where everybody's at. And then we also have to look below the hood and lift up the hood and say, what's going on and below that, to be able to say, what are we doing for related services? How are we applying it? All these other pieces. And we do have good conversations with the superintendents about how do we start to look at it's special ed pieces that they're supporting, but they are also looking at how they make sure that they're supporting the tier 1 and tier 2 supports too. That special ed is not able to be able to, we can't cover it all across the board, but we can help support that. So these are good conversations.
I just wanted to make a comment. You mentioned earlier, Elizabeth, that, the reason that services might look different in some other districts is because those districts may be supplementing in some way. But I do want to note that my experience has been that it's not just that. I just wanted to just call out that I think there have been some instances where there has been a drastic difference in even the quality of staff that are being sent into certain districts versus who's being sent other places. So I just want to mention, because I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that this is still, and I think you know this, but I just want to say this is work special has to do. And it's not just about, well, those districts happen to be supplementing and we're doing everything we're supposed to do. I think there are some actual issues that need to be addressed within special. And it sounds like because we're talking about equity, you're already having conversations with superintendents that you're working on that. But I wanted to just kind of call that out because I don't want us to walk away with, oh, it only looks that way because districts are supplementing. That's not the only reason it looks that way.
I agree. I totally agree. And I wasn't saying that. I wasn't saying it was the only reason for it. And I appreciate that perspective. I do believe, though, that it is a known fact that there are districts that provide paraprofessionals for their general education classrooms. Sure. And then there's districts that don't provide that. So that does dramatically change when you start to look at IEPs and what supports are being provided in the general education environment.
Sure, I agree that staff are that's happening. I just wanted to call out that that's not the only reason why we see those differences.
There are multiple reasons there is multiple ways to really look at and keep drilling down and to support in terms of looking at how do we support districts and how do we make sure we're doing it in a meaningful way and in a very in a thoughtful approach way too.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
This is Debbie Hopper. I have a question about the input from the various different groups. On page 24 of the slide, there were a number of different groups that input you'd be seeking, but I didn't see students as one of those input groups, and I was wondering what the thought is around inviting students to offer up their input.
Of course, we'll invite, of course. They were just left off the list.
Okay. And then also in line with the equity issue, what is going to be the format for getting the input from the various different groups to make sure that all voices are heard.
That hasn't been determined yet.
Okay. There any other questions from governing council members? Okay. Excellent discussion. Thank you.
I need a motion, Ms. Hopper.
Yes, with that then, I would like to ask for a motion and a second to.
This is.
Hello?
No, I was going to make the motion. I'll wait.
Oh, okay. A motion and a second to approve the revision of the comprehensive school improvement plan for 2020 to 21.
This is Veronica Morrow Real, Riverview Gardens. I make the motion.
This is Larry Felton. I'll second.
Any further discussion or questions? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. Our next agenda item, 5.02, approval of FY21 budget. I understand we have a presentation by Rich Carver, the interim CFO.
Yes. Good evening. I'm going to talk about the budget, which is on the agenda tonight for approval by the Governing Council. It was approved last Tuesday at the board meeting of the Board of Education Special Schools District. Next slide, Mark. And these were the goals we talked about back in March when I met with the Governing Council and under the CSIP goals that we just talked about, to purchase curriculum supports to improve performance and enable students to meet their goals on the workforce excellence, to focus on the paraprofessional recruitment and retention, and doing some things on that that are embedded in the budget, and to maintain the adjusted fund balance at 45%. And I'll talk about that in a minute. The one goal that's not being met is to keep the increase in non-personal expenditures to 4.5%. Part of that is the decrease in expenses this year due to COVID-19. We're not having to incur some substitute costs. We're not incurring some transportation costs and other costs you typically incur over the last 2.5 months of the school year. And then equity, proactively working with the districts, and Dr. Keenan has talked about that, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. Next slide, Mark. These are the major assumptions we talked about in March. I'll point out that on the property tax revenue, I trimmed that back a little bit, and that assumes more protested taxes due to the coronavirus, with, plus businesses going out of business. The biggest impact actually on our revenue from March until today is the substantial drop in interest rates. When we put together the investment earnings for the 21 budget back in January, rates were hovering around 1.5%, and now they're 0.25%, and they're forecast to stay there for quite a long period of time to come. The transportation revenue has been cut through the budget process cycle with the state legislature, and we've got a slight decrease in IDEA, and that's due to a one-time adjustment this fiscal year. And then in terms of the equity, the disproportionality or early intervening services for 11 districts, we have 2.1 million in non-personnel expenses for next year and 18.5 new positions in several of the 11 districts. And then curriculum, where we've got some new adoptions in there. Next slide, please. This is a summary of the variances, kind of the bridge from the March numbers until the final budget. On the revenue, You can see the property tax is 900,000 lower than we had in the preliminary budget, and that's attributable to COVID-19. The sales tax, Prop C, I think every school district's going to see a similar reduction. We're assuming a 15% reduction for now. Investment earnings, that was, I mentioned the 2.6 million due to the substantial decrease in rates. Transportation, we're looking at a decrease of 1.2 million due to state cuts that are COVID-19 related. Entitlement, we will have a carryover of early intervening services from this year to next year, but we also anticipate some for 21. And then on the adult ed and Pell Grants that we get for adult ed programs, we're anticipating a loss of about $657,000, mainly in our LPN program. And then on the other side, the expenses, we actually have more expenses assumed, although salaries is pretty flat. We adjusted the attrition upward. So it shows a slight decrease in salaries from March. Benefits, there's a big increase, and that's reflects the fact that this year we've had a sharp increase in claims expense, and we increased our budget for next year as a result of that. We also added some funds in there for, we put out an RFP in the last few weeks for a new accounting and human resource software enterprise reporting system. And we put in $400,000 for the first year, assuming that we do choose a new system. We got late word from brokers that our property insurance is going up significantly by $169,000. We're actually changing carriers, or the increase would have been higher. Supplies, we have already ordered this year, just in the last month, almost 300,000 in PPE, the personal protective equipment, and we put another little over 700,000 into next year's budget. And then technology, we've got a new benefits application so that we can automate more of our processes. It's a very manual process we have now for recording all the changes in benefits for every level of employee and retirees. And so we've got a net increase in expenditures of almost 6.8 million, and a net increase in the deficit, which was about 1.1 million back in March, is now over 14 million. Next slide. And this is a summary of the revenues by source. The local revenues talked about the decreases there, and that's mainly the investment earnings and the Prop C sales tax decrease. The state, we're actually looking for a slight increase, but that may change because we've got a lot of unknowns going into this fiscal 21 budget year. The governor just announced cuts late this afternoon. That's going to affect all of us, decreasing the formula for this year, and also decreasing transportation funding this year. And I would expect we'll see some cuts into next year. And if you're a hold harmless district, as special school district is, we are not subject to those cuts, but because there's a state of emergency, the governor basically is waiving the statute that protects hold harmless districts from cuts. So we get to participate in those cuts. And then on the federal side, it's pretty well flat. And so we're looking at about a $1.9 million decrease from this year's budget or latest forecast. Next slide. The expenses, these mainly reflect on the salaries, staff increases, new staff positions, that is, including the 18.5 I mentioned to partner districts for early intervening services, and then also salary increases that average around 3%. It'll probably end up being a little bit less than that, actually. Fringe benefits is a 5.8% increase, and mainly driven by higher insurance, medical insurance costs. Purchase services, some of the items I mentioned earlier, and supplies, the PPE equipment. And there's also some changes in coding between purchase services and supplies for next year. And then capital, we've got a 3.3% increase and overall 5.2% increase in expenditures budgeted for next year. Next slide. This just shows for the current year and the prior 2 years, the revenue versus expenses. And obviously we've had pretty good size surpluses for the last 2 years, and we'll have a surplus again this year, even with today's cuts. But next year, expenses will exceed revenue. Next slide. This is the fund balance summary, and it shows actual for 19, the forecast or revised budget for the end of this year, and the budget for next year, where we'll be at June 30, 21. On the fund balance, the normal fund balance level that you are used to looking at, we're looking at going from 64.2 to 58.2%, still pretty very healthy fund balance percent. And then we show on our facilities plan remaining debt service, if you will, the 36,677,000 includes all of our principal payments going forward, plus our interest expense due next year. And so we've got an ending balance net of those obligations of 47.2%, and that would the coverage would be 7.2 months, assuming the same level of revenue from July to November next year as we had this year. Next slide, please. This is just a narrative of what I just pointed out. Again, that the adjusted fund balance is 47.2%. The goal, the board's goal is 45% adjusted goal balance at the end of June 21. And that expense level still covers 7.2 months of expense. Next slide. These are the positions broken down by different segments. So we did add 3 positions from March. One is a teacher in the vocational skills program, and 2 are teacher assistants in that same vocational skills program for high school students. We're adding 15 positions in our SSD schools and programs, mainly teachers and teacher assistants for increases, student increases. Next slide. We talked about this a minute ago. This is the breakdown of the 18.5 positions, 3 teacher level, 8.5 social workers to work in certain districts, mainly in North County, 3 school psychologists, and 4 teacher assistants. Next slide, please. And then finally, we've got 7 district-wide positions. The director position is a director of equity. And then the operation side, we've added 5 bus driver positions and 6 bus monitors due to needs. We're running thin in terms of covering routes. So we're adding drivers and monitors for our bus operations. Next slide. So we, to summarize, we have 83 new positions, 29.2 positions that we've eliminated, and for a net new positions of 53.8. And in the other handout that's attached to this agenda item, there's a lot more detail, and there's one page towards the back of that package that shows positions by specific category. The next slide. This shows the enrollment for the last 10 years, and pretty much the increase, decrease in special ed students. It's based on our December 1 count, which we have to report to DESE every year. And this compares to Missouri's statewide increase, and it pretty well has mirrored the state for the last 3 or 4 years. It's a little bit at 0.61% this year, December 119 versus 0.29 for the state, slightly higher, but still comparable. And then at the bottom, you can see that as of December 1, SSD had 23,286 students with an IEP, or 16.3% of total county enrollment. And for the state of Missouri, we have 132,147, and that's an incidence rate of 15%. Next slide. And that's my presentation, and ask for any questions you all may have.
I have a question, and just kind of, it plays into the budget, but does SSD offer early retirement incentives to certified and classified staff?
No, not really. We have a early notification incentive, so that and we've had that for several years, so that and I think normally it's by the end of December, if we get notice from retirees, they get, I think, $500, and that helps human resources to start fill those positions.
Okay, is there ever any discussion about trying to do that, at least maybe not even every year, but occasional years, just to help with opening up? You know, you get more teachers when you have teachers who are further along on the pay scale, and if they opt to retire early, then you're able to get, you know, 2 teachers for the price of that one, kind of thing. I'm just wondering if that's ever something that's discussed.
Well, I guess I think until we have a pretty good handle on our vacancies, we want to keep all of them we can, as long as we can at this point. And then typically districts do that when there's financial, or there's, you know, it's when those hard to fill positions is a little bit more difficult. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
I have a question for Mr. Carver. Is the special school district affected by financial institutions tax, and did you see any change in that this year?
We do receive revenue from that. And let's see, we had a fairly significant decrease. It just seems to jump around a little bit. We're assuming a slight decrease for next year. It was 2.8 million in the fiscal year 18. It was 2.8 million in 19, and then it dropped to 1.9 million this year.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Hearing none, may I have a motion and a second to approve the FY21 budget?
This is Isabel. I'll make that motion.
This is Shannon Kohler Bayless. I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. Our next agenda item 5.03 is an update on distance learning on the COVID environment with Dr. Keenan.
So Dr. Bauer is going to update us on the COVID-19 response, and he's going to kind of take us and walk us through what we've been working on and how we're going to continue to evaluate where we're at going into the beginning of the next year.
Thank you. I'm going to talk about COVID-19 and how SSD responded to that. Next slide, please. Start with a little timeline. It was in January that we first heard about coronavirus. It was in the news. We find out now that in December it was in China, but we first started talking about it, started hitting the news in this area in January. In February, we started thinking, as it continued in the news, in February, we started thinking that we need to start planning for this. We thought back to the H1N1 pandemic. That was about 10 years ago. And we did some planning for that. Even though we never had to get to the point of closing schools or anything, we still had high absence rates. So we figured we'd better start planning. So to be a little proactive on it, we, to address the possibility that at that time, possibility that we would have to close schools, we started to gather a library of learning activities that could be given to students remotely. Next slide. So that brings us to March. We were meeting along with other St. Louis County superintendents with the health departments. March 15th, the superintendents made the decision to close schools until April 3rd. And at that time, we directed our staff to start providing instruction remotely. Next slide, please. Mid-March, we adopted a 4+1 format that some other districts had been using. That format was that we would provide, the teacher would provide instruction on 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday. On the 5th day, students would have work to do at home independently, and teachers would take that day to conference with parents, to consult with parents, and to help individual students. Later in March, the superintendents decided to close the schools until April 22nd. At that time, the guidance had been to meet all of that none of the timeline requirements under IDEA were being waived. So we directed our staff to act accordingly as far as IEPs and evaluations and that sort of thing. The direction from the U.S. Department of Education was, if possible, to continue. We gave guidelines to our staff for remote and virtual instruction so that we could have some consistency and some system to this. Next slide, please. April 9th is when the superintendents decided to close for the rest of the year. And with that, spring events and graduations were canceled. On that day also, we launched an electronic consent form for parents. There had been some question about preservation of confidentiality and privacy through online instruction, who could see what and that sort of thing. So we decided to be safe to obtain consent from parents for their child to participate in Google Classroom and things like that. This isn't really, the next item isn't really an instructional one, but it just so shows SSD's commitment to helping our families. We began a virtual food drive for Operation Food Search. And on that same day, the distant learning plans went live online. Next page, please. Soon after that, we added ABA and related services to the distance learning plans. And I'll talk about the distance learning plans in more detail later, but we added that to it. Then beginning of May, we decided this isn't going to last forever. So let's start to plan to reopen. So every one of our schools has a plan that is compliant with Centers for Disease Control and St. Louis County Health Department for reopening whenever that time comes. The reopening date is not certain at this time, but we'll be ready. Next slide, please. Distance learning plans, we base this on guidance from DESE and from Office of Special Ed Programs and OSERS. The distance learning plan is based on the student's IEP. The amount of services in the plan are proportionate to the IEP. So what that means is based on the amount of time of special ed services when school is in session, we gave a proportionate amount of services while students were closed. And we had guidelines that Missouri didn't offer any guidelines, but the state of Illinois did. So we used theirs so that we would have some consistency and some documentation of what we were doing. Learning plans can be in different formats. We can do group work, Google Classroom or Zoom. We can do individual work. They can be recorded. They can be live. Next slide. They've been pretty successful. We have 89% of our students have a distance learning plan, and it would be higher, except that is 89% of every student in our system, including students who have just transferred into the district, including pending students. These are students who may never have been seen by one of our teachers before. So you can't really write a plan for a student you've never seen before. So we're at 89%. As far as the electronic consent form, 62% of parents used our electric consent form to provide consent. Of the remainder, about 2.5% declined in online instruction. And the remainder had been given consent in some other way, either through their partner district or through some prior communication with the teacher. In fairness, and without wanting to pile too much on parents and teachers, if a teacher already had consent from the parent in some form, we went with that. Next slide, please. So our concern was that we would reach every student. Well, we reached 21,000 of them. The distance learning plans, again, direct instruction and special ed, general education, or both. About 4,300 of the students had a learning plan that was uploaded into their partner district's system. Almost 17,000 used the system that we developed. Next slide, please. Through this all, we were concerned about mental health of our students, their families, and our staff, physical well-being of everybody. The focus was to continue instruction. We made a point to say from the beginning that SSD did not close. Our schools closed, but the district did not. We were continuing operations. We were continuing to make resources available. And we wanted to make sure of the closure, its effects on families, students, and staff, and do what we could to mitigate that. Next slide, please. Moving forward, as I said, we have plans for reopening our schools, and the partner districts are creating plans. The plans that SSD have developed are for SSD schools. Our staff who work in partner districts will follow the plan that the partner district develops. Again, we're using CDC and Health Department guidance. Periodically, CDC updates their guidance, so we're keeping up on that. And if any changes are indicated by that, we're making them. We're looking at a phased reopening when we look at our offices. Our instruction will be virtual or remote. We are starting our ESY program June 8th, and that will be a virtual program. The ESY in the partner districts is going to be based on the partner district schedules. Next slide, please. In July, we're going to start to debrief. We've never done anything like this. I have worked in education for a lot of years and never experienced anything like this. So a lot of times we were flying by the seat of our pants, just like everybody else was. So we want to debrief on this. We want to see lessons learned. We want to see what we did well and what we could have done better. And we're going to get input from parents and students and teachers from administrators. Next slide. We're going to evaluate our response overall. We're going to evaluate the distance learning process. levels of parent engagement, levels of student engagement. We're going to look at any technology issues that we might have had. We're going to evaluate the communications that we had with parents and our staff and our students. And we're going to evaluate our level of compliance. Next slide. Any questions?
I have a question. This is Shannon from Bayless. Of the students that did not participate, do you know why was it that they did not? Do you know what the majority of the reason was? Parents didn't have the accommodations, or was it technology? Was there a common thing that you found was the issue for those that did not participate?
We made technology available and hotspots. The typical reason for not participating is that the parents just didn't want to do it. They had other issues. They had other things going on, and they didn't want to have to add that.
I would like to comment on that. From personal experience, I will say it's not about what the parents have going on, but about what was offered, and that the parents were able to access better resources.
And if that's the case, and they were able to get better resources for their child, that's great.
One other comment I'd want to make too. I know that DESI asked school districts for input on technologies and coverage and things like that. And when they put all I think it was like 350 of the 500 districts responded. And they pretty much determined about 23% of students have either degraded internet service or no internet service. So I think that was just a general issue that everybody had. So that's something everybody's aware of it, but the issue becomes what providers offer, what the cost of lifeline services are, and what it took. I know that Spectrum offered an extremely low cost access to people for this certain situation, but that's an issue when you got literally 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 4 kids that has a very difficult time getting any content, no matter who it's coming from.
And that is why we made Chromebooks available to families that didn't have them.
Yeah.
And we made hotspots available also.
This is Debbie Hopper. Are there any plans to get feedback from SSD families on what they liked, they disliked, or how they think things could be improved in future online learning or virtual
Yeah, that's
learning?
what I referred to when we talked about getting information for our evaluation of what we did.
Okay.
Families and students will definitely be part of that.
Yeah, and we've already started with surveys. We've already sent out some parent surveys and staff surveys. So we'll continue to, when the group is coming together, we're going to, an after action review, we are going to look at those pieces. And in the survey, when we sent it out to families, we asked some specific questions around the distance process and the learning plans, and if they wanted any further questions, concerns, and we respond. You know, we will follow up with a phone call to those parents, and we're collecting all that information. So each one of the directors are responsible for following up with parent concerns, and then we're going to review those after we get back together in June or around June 15th is when we're going to start with this group.
I had 2 questions. One, I didn't hear any mention of your graduation. So what were your graduation plans for the SSD schools? And then also, go ahead.
No, I'll wait for the rest of your question.
The second part of my question, the second question was, are you looking at professional development with your staff to assess their ability to teach online in the future, should we have to reach this second wave of the pandemic and have to go and start the school year online, or, you know, start in person and end up having to go back online for, you know, some point during the first or second semester?
Well, to answer your second question, yes, we are. To answer your first question, and I'm sorry, I've got a tickle in my throat. We, for example, at North Tech, we had a day, it was last week, that students were available to come up, pick up their caps and gowns, get photos taken, pick up their diplomas, and the like. We have each of our principals created a slideshow of graduates that was available on social media to the graduates. And we're also looking at rescheduling a North Tech graduation at some time in the future.
And we did the signs too in their yards too.
What about South Tech?
South Tech, nobody graduates from South Tech. They graduate from.
So it's a half day, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any further discussion?
Are you discussing the potential to furlough any employees if, I mean, I know you're still trying to depend, it completely depends on what the, what education looks like in the coming school year, but might you need to furlough employees, or can you repurpose employees to do other things so you do not have to furlough them and they can still serve purpose in some other form?
We are not looking at doing that right now. We are looking at continuing our employees as they are.
Yeah, we because it's so difficult to fill a lot of our positions, and especially our hourly employees, we are committed to supporting them. And because if a lot of cases right now, a lot of businesses that laid people off, now they're having to hire all these people backwards, scramble to get people. And we didn't want to start the school year if we're hoping as much as we can to do it in person if it's safe, but to furlough our staff and then put them into a tough situation financially, it just doesn't make sense for us to be able to be ready for school to open. And so we were, as a board, was committed to making sure that we were supporting our hourly staff, which would be our paraprofessionals and our bus drivers, transportation, and that.
Thank you.
Any other discussion?
So what was the staff's, I had one more. What was the staff's comfort level with online learning? I know it was an adjustment for everybody, and some staff members were more comfortable, even in our district, and others with it than, some people are just more comfortable with the technology than others. So how did your staff adjust to it with the services that were needed for the student population?
I think overall, they responded well to it. They got used to it. We gave them some supports in getting started up. I think what they disliked the most about the online instruction is that they weren't right there with their students. That personal contact is very important, and they didn't have that. But I think overall, as well as delivering the instruction, I think our staff performed well on it. You're right, there are various levels of comfort, but they all came through.
I've been doing Zoom calls with all the partner district teachers and with our SSD teachers, and on any given call, I have between 10 to 15 teachers on there. And it's interesting because when we went into shelter in place on March 18th, nobody was fully ready to do the Google Classrooms, the Schoology, all those type of things. And it was clear that the teachers were saying it was difficult at first, but they're starting to see real positive pieces around it. It's hard because they're missing their students, but there are some unique pieces that they thought, well, we can utilize these pieces. And it really, by I think week 3, week 4 is when teachers started to feel a little bit more comfortable. But the other thing is we're going to make sure we have a toolkit for teachers who are, if we have to do this again, and I say if we have to, and we hope we don't, but we want to make sure we have videos for people to watch and view to see how you get familiar. We noticed that when we started to provide videos of instructions showing people how to use different platforms, it was much more well received and helped support them. So we're going to have a lot more of our teachers to be able to, give that visual piece of it. But it was clear by week 4, people were feeling a little bit more comfortable just with the overall electronic process, the Google Classrooms, the Zoom lessons, and all those pieces.
Any further discussion? Questions? Okay, well, thank you very much for providing us with an update on all of that. Our next agenda item 6.0 is budget adjustments. This is to request approval of FY20 budget adjustment. The Special School District Board of Education approved an increase of $26,523,973 to the fund balance at their Board of Education meeting on February 25th, 2020. We all received what those budget adjustments are. At this time, I'd like to ask for a motion and a second to approve the FY20 budget adjustment. Do I have a motion and a second?
This is Veronica.
I'll make that motion.
This is
This is Veronica.
I'll second.
Okay.
All those in favor, or is there any discussion or questions about it? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed or abstentions? Motion carries. Next agenda item 7.0 is calendar of events. The next governing council meeting is scheduled for Monday, September 14, 2020. This meeting will also serve as our reorganization meeting to elect the governing council chairperson, vice chairperson, and secretary. My question is, are we going to schedule the dinner ahead of time like we had planned on doing for tonight's meeting with the PAC and SSD Board of Education?
I think, Deb, can I make a recommendation? We'll see where we're at with the COVID and, if it's safe enough to have a in-person large meeting like this. I think it's going to be really playing things by ear. But we will definitely would like to be able to do that to kind of keep that tradition moving along.
Okay, so we'll just play that by ear. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, very good. Agenda item 8, announcements. Are there any announcements this evening from governing council members? Okay, hearing none, I'll move on to agenda item 9. May I have a motion and a second to adjourn this meeting?
Larry Felton.
Ms. Hopper,
Yes.
Dr. Youngblood is having issues with her microphone and asked for me to read an announcement from her.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I will be serving on the Hazelwood School District Board for my 4th term. However, I will not be joining you for the next school year. I wish success to each of you, and I've enjoyed being part of working with you. Ms. Cheryl Latham will be joining you for the 2021 school year. Have a safe and wonderful summer. Dr. Brenda Youngblood.
We certainly appreciate all of her years of service on the Special School District Governing Council.
Debbie,
Yes.
this is Veronica Morrow. Before we adjourn, I believe that some other individuals, after we did roll call or possibly in attendance at the meeting, if anyone is from Clayton, Maplewood, Richmond Heights, Webster, Rockwood, and Valley Park, would you let me know if you're on the line?
Yeah, I am from Webster. This is Alex Kahn.
Thank you.
Hmm.
Any further business? I'd like for everybody to, we'll just prepare for our September 14 meeting, and hearing no further business, may I have a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting?
Larry Felton, so moved.
Jen Miller, second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
There's never a delay in that one. There's never any pause. It's the fastest
Thank you
one.
all. I know this went a little longer than our normal meetings, but it was wonderful content, and appreciate everyone's time in preparing the reports and the presentations for us tonight. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you for everything you guys
Thank
do.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent questions.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Everybody be safe.
Yes, you too.